You're now
And-
live.
And I heard I am, but Les's last name, okay. So who is our first witness, Faith?
Senator Pearson.
Oh, Senator Senator Pearson, the floor is yours.
Senator, I am.
This is the Senate Finance Committee, et cetera, et cetera. We're meeting and taking testimony on what
is it
Senator
S80?
Pearson will share with us. Yeah.
S80, I believe, is I think an interesting discussion, and is grounded in a deep concern about income inequality, which we've been talking about for here and there for weeks. And it's interesting because what concerns me is that we have a tax structure that perpetuates the widening of income inequality. So what do I mean? This bill would look at institutions that are in Vermont that are tax exempt, that are paying leadership more than we pay the US president. And I just hinge it there because A, that's a moving target that Congress defines. And nobody, I don't think, can argue that there's a job in Vermont that's harder and more taxing than being the commander-in-chief of the US. And specifically, this comes to light in my mind around the medical center up the street from where I live, where leadership is paid $1 million, $2 million a year. They have several, according to 990 forms, several people earning over $500,000 a year. And this perpetuates a huge public health problem, which is income inequality. And while they perpetuate income inequality, we all pay more taxes to support their operation in a number of ways. Obviously, they're exempt from the school property tax, so everyone else pays more. There are also charitable organizations. So when a very wealthy Vermonter, a Bruce Listman or somebody, gives a donation to the hospital, we all pay more in income tax because that's a written off tax exemption. So I started thinking about this, trying to figure out if we could dig into this a little bit. And it turns out that the state is not obligated to parallel the tax exempt status handed down by the federal government. And so what I propose here is that we examine nonprofits, big nonprofits in the state, and any that is paying leadership more than we pay the president would lose their tax exempt status for Vermont taxes. It's in some ways very simple. And I think, I would be surprised if this advanced all the way. But I think it's important that as we grapple with, and as we have, Senator McDonald, you have talked about this in different ways for many weeks. We can't just pretend we have no tools to deal with income inequality. We have a lot of tools. The question really is whether or not we're willing to use them, and whether or not we want to commit across the board or continue to just nibble around some of the edges. And so I would leave it there and maybe ask Ledge Counsel if I've omitted any key details. No.
Any questions for Senator Pearson? I confess I have not read the bill. It appears to be, to listen to it, that it is short. Is that correct?
Relatively. Senator Bray.
Can you refresh my memory, Senator Pearson? What is the commander-in-chief's salary?
It is in the neighborhood of $450,000 a year.
Whoa,
Thank you.
plus housing.
Plus housing. That's right. Yeah, he's struggling. We did this something a little bit similar a few years ago that hinged it to how we pay the governor. And that the governor earns, I don't know, $170,000, $180,000 a year. And it pulled in a lot of people. It pulled in a lot of directors of our designated agencies. And, I mean, it's an extraordinary world where we have the median household income is about 60 grand. That's well over what a lot of these leaders are getting a month. And there's just such a huge disconnect. And yet people will tell you, well, the market demands it. I mean, maybe, but I also think that we could put pressure on our nonprofit partners to not play into this game, that there are Vermonters and people from around the country who would lead these organizations absent, earning $150,000 a month. I think it's entirely possible. We've just never run that experiment. The salary equivalents that they run up at the hospital are based out of Boston and New York. They're based out of big teaching hospital models to draw parallels, which is totally out of scale with the Vermont economy.
Senator Hardy, you had the question, or has it been answered?
I do, but Senator Brock can go first. I'm going to
Senator
mull my
Brock.
question.
Well, I've served on a lot of nonprofit boards of all sizes, including national organizations that pay the kinds of salaries that you talk about, and local or more regional organizations that don't. And I'm very concerned about the legislature. And I realize that that the taxing authority is a separate issue, but I am concerned the legislature comes in and tries to micromanage what an organization like the Medical Center Hospital does regarding salaries, because the boards typically, and certainly if you take a look at the board of the medical center, has a large number of folks who are well qualified, well experienced, and broad. And what one does on a large board before setting compensation is pretty extensive in order to meet the requirements that are expected. Yes, you could get somebody who can work for peanuts, but there's that old saying that when you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Now, in point of fact, we look for someone to lead an organization like the Medical Center who is exceptionally well qualified and competitive in the marketplace. And that's one of the determinations that's used, certainly in terms of the work that's done in order to do salary competitiveness and salary surveys. And yeah, in some cases it may be flawed, but at the same time, you're looking for a top-notch person who is used to running an organization with 10,000 people and $1 billion plus in revenue. And there is a salary component. Now, when we compare that to the President of the United States, the President gets $400,000 a year, but he also gets residents, he gets helicopters, he gets a guarding staff, he gets a personal staff, and he gets to play golf 1/3 of the year. And when you then lay that down against the compensation of the head of the medical center, there's actually results that are expected by the head of the medical center or any one of these other nonprofits. So I'm just very concerned about our getting involved in this at all. I'm not sure that should be the role of the legislature to manage compensation in such a micromanaged way.
Well, I would just comment that.
Senator Harding, did you have a question?
I'll let Senator Pearson respond to Senator Brock. This is interesting.
Well, I was going to go there next and ask Senator Pearson to lay out what the problem is that he's seeking to solve, and then we'll listen to the various answers that the people. Maybe then we'll go back to Senator Brock. Senator Pearson.
Well, this bill doesn't micromanage the entities at all. It does ask us to contemplate whether or not we want to react with our tax policy. You know, income inequality is a public health problem. It is a crisis. It is exploding. It is at levels of from, you know, pre-depression, the big depression era. And that has a health implication across our state and our economy. And, you know, so I think it's appropriate to highlight tax status of some of these players if they want to continue to exacerbate income inequality for all the reasons you're laying out. I think it's appropriate for us to react and decide, well, maybe they can then pay the full freight of taxes. But by your logic, Senator, you know, we don't pay the governor near enough because he supervises thousands of workers. We ought to up salaries for all the commissioners, and all of the people that we've attracted to those positions are, by your logic, totally inadequate. I reject that. I think that there are Vermonters and people from across the country who are dedicated to service, who are dedicated to a mission, and who are not exactly suffering because they're earning $160,000 a year. I mean, that's an exorbitant salary by Vermont standards. So, you know, I would just say we have choices in front of us, and to continue to act as if the economy runs around us as though we have no lever, I think is a mistake and an unfortunate and a disservice to our people, who so many are struggling and living paycheck to paycheck. An exorbitant, what is it? Half of Vermonters are a paycheck, one disaster away, one car repair away from serious trouble. Loads of personal debt, credit card debt. You know, we need to confront this.
Well, at the same time, then I would argue that the economy is not a zero-sum game, in that the only way to improve the lot of people at the lower end is to take money from people at the upper end. And the obvious object that we certainly talk about is increasing the size of the pie is the way to deal with the true issue of income inequality. I realize that's a debate that we could have interminably with arguments on both sides of that scale. But at the same time, I'm just very reluctant to go in and attempt to tell organizations in Vermont how much they should pay their executives. And with a view not towards increasing the tax revenue, which theoretically is what we're talking about. That, though, is not the purpose. The bill is to force income equality and to force them to pay less. That's a different object. That's a different kind of thing that we're doing. And we're using tax policy to do it. And I'm not sure that that's a wise thing to do.
I'm not going to speak for, I would ask the question, if we have been increasing the size of the pie for the last 40 years at the same time that income inequality has become greater. So does anybody have like to weigh in on why is the inequality getting greater when we've done, Senator Brock, what you've suggested, which to increase the size of the pie? It doesn't seem to be changing the direction.
Well, I'm not sure that it's not changing the direction or that it's of no help. Yes, we certainly can do better in increasing the size of the pie. It goes to many of the issues that we talk about. And that is when in this body, we have a tendency when we see an economic problem, our sole focus is to increase revenues and never to talk about decreasing costs. We never talk about that. And that's in a way how government seems to operate in this regard.
Well, I would just push back and say, if we advanced S80, we would decrease the tax bill for every Vermonter but these institutions, because we're all carrying them when they are not contributing to the municipal taxes, not contributing to the school taxes, not contributing. We're paying to forgive charitable donations to their institutions, et cetera. So in fact, we would reduce, one way to do it would be to take that revenue and reduce people's tax burden.
Well, in point of fact, though, when you take revenue, and that's the whole issue of the zero-sum game, is that it doesn't mean that you've reduced any cost, because the net effect in most cases is that those costs that the entity passes on simply increase. You can't suggest that if you increase the cost to the medical center hospital, that the cost of healthcare won't increase. And that'll make up the difference.
There were other, I think I saw it, was it Senator Sorokin? Did you have a hand up a little while ago? Oh, sorry, Senator Brett.
I did not.
Senator Pearson, I just want to make sure I'm understanding how you're seeing it. When you say that the salaries have a negative impact on health, and so that's sort of the door into this conversation, can you explain a little more about how you're seeing that play out?
There's a lot of data out there that sort of identify income inequality as a public health crisis. And to the extent we have widening income inequality, which is not really debatable, we therefore are exacerbating the public health crisis, whether it's around nutrition or healthy living environments, et cetera, et cetera. And so the point is, I suppose, to look at the irony of having large nonprofits, particularly in our medical sphere, but it's probably elsewhere, that are contributing to that income inequality, to the crisis that is stemming from that, and continuing to give them a favorable tax status. That's a choice. That's a policy choice that I think is appropriate to look at.
Okay.
Senator Hardy.
Can I follow up, Senator McDonald? So just so I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, I'm just trying to follow the thread a little further along. So I'm trying to see how changing what they can pay for executive salaries ends up somehow flowing back to helping low-income Vermonters. You know, I'm not disputing in any way that, right, there's a health impact of poverty. I mean, it's like across the board, a great predictor of all sorts of bad consequences. So, but how do you think the changing the salary structure would end up flowing back to help the people that I think probably we're all in agreement we'd like to see do better?
Well, I guess there's two options. One is the pressure that's contemplated through tax policy of this bill could actually reduce salaries at the exorbitant salaries at the high end in some of these institutions, and therefore reduce healthcare costs. And those are borne, by taxpayers of all kinds, right? Over 60% of healthcare costs are paid through public dollars when you add our public workers and et cetera. So that would be one idea, would be to just reduce healthcare, as an example, healthcare spending, which would then come back and reduce bills for us. The other way is that it doesn't succeed in reducing those salaries, but then this bill takes effect in terms of removing that tax advantage of being considered nonprofit and non-taxable in Vermont, and therefore generating extra revenue, which we would utilize in any number of ways. That'd be a policy decision, but to Senator Brock's assertion, one way to do it would be to reduce everyone else's tax burden, reduce the property tax bill that you and I are paying because these institutions are tax exempt, reduce our income tax because we have less tax write-offs to cover from donations going to them, et cetera. So in two ways, you have, I guess, two avenues to have a positive impact on income inequality, and also overall, to highlight this discussion and to acknowledge that we're not powerless to impact it.
Thank you.
Senator Hardy.
Thank you. So I agree with your goals, Senator Pearson. And I think, tackling income inequality is certainly something we should be doing with tax policy. I've said that a couple times in this committee already. And I think that there are lots of ways that we should be talking about doing that. One of the reasons I'm a little uncomfortable with this bill is that because it seems a little personal. And we're talking about one institution right now, and that makes me uncomfortable. And I also, it makes me a little uncomfortable that we're talking about just nonprofit organizations. And if we're going to make this assertion that this could be helpful, then we should be talking about all types of organizations, including, private for-profit companies. Because if you can make the argument for the nonprofits, you can make the argument for the for-profits. And so I think that, and I don't know who said it, but I'm not sure that it would get to I think it helps at the top, but I'm not sure it helps at the bottom. And so there are some provisions that I've seen that would limit a CEO's salary to a certain percentage of the lowest paid or something like that, so that they're tying the top and the bottom together. But I also would be concerned about impacting the financial health of some of the nonprofits in our state that are providing a really significant public good. So I think we would want to really dig into that a little bit more. I'm not sure what the, larger implications are. David knows that at all, but just this conversation makes me a little uncomfortable because we seem to be focusing on one entity, and I don't think that's fair.
Mike, since I'm in charge here, Senator Pearson has offered a way to deal with a slice of the income equality, and I would say that if other senators believe that income inequality is a problem, they would offer additional ways to deal with it and not leave Senator Pearson out there getting whacked. So, Senator Hardy, and I do feel uncomfortable that this is the only thing we've had offered.
I'm not whacking Senator Pearson. He's my buddy. I'm just saying that the conversation about one organization makes me uncomfortable.
What might make you comfortable in tackling the problem that Senator Pearson has attempted to tackle here?
I think talking about broader tax policy and how we use that to tackle income inequality. And I think that we have talked about that a little bit. It looks like our income tax structure is actually fairly progressive in the state. We could probably tweak it a little bit more. We have some options in our sales tax and in our property tax. And I think that, digging more into talking about tax policy, which we haven't done very much, would be really helpful and could get to some of these issues. And I understand you see these salaries of some of these CEOs, and it's not just nonprofit medical centers, it's CEOs across the board. It feels really horrible and disgusting that they're making so much more than the average Vermonter or the average American. But in our small state, when we talk about one institution, it feels personal and it feels inappropriate. And I feel like if we're going to have this conversation, it should be broader. And
we're having it be broader.
I'm trying to make it broader.
Well,
so that's my discomfort with the conversation. I'll cede the floor to whomever.
Well, if I could just react quickly, because
we leave Senator Brock here has the role of speaking to each suggestion that comes up and giving a contrary, or a constructive view about the consequences of what's being brought up.
Mr. Chair,
every group
Senator Pierce
to have what
could I just
has, and that is an agitator. And I realize that I think I'm playing that role today. But I think Senator Hardy answered a lot of the question when we talked about what we do with tax policy. And of course, we have to look at the Tax Structure Commission report, which is on our table to examine. And I know, I believe that they have looked at to some extent this as we have in previous studies. But the answer to matching income inequality, at least in the way that legislatures typically do, and we've done it by one of the most progressive tax rates on upper income people in the United States that we have in Vermont in state tax right now. Let's not forget what we've already done and are continuing to do.
I would just like to react because Senator Hardy is uncomfortable with what she says is making it personal. This bill is not personal. I highlight UVMMC because they're an easy example. The salary ranges have been in the headlines. This applies across the board. I suspect it would bring in UVM leadership at the university. I would suspect it might bring in other universities, and it certainly would bring other health professionals in. Do you know that we have a COLA for the world and we have a COLA for healthcare? It is an industry that operates with its own cost of living, literally calculated separate and apart from the rest of our lives. This is a bad process. I agree with you, Senator Hardy, that CEO pay, exorbitant CEO pay across the board is a problem. The difference is that when Keurig or dealer.com or, pick your company, Ben & Jerry's wants to give their CEO a lot of a huge paycheck, we tax them because that's income. We tax their corporate profits. We tax their property holdings. The difference is in the nonprofit sector, we give them a tax exemption. And that is a choice that we are making. And I think the concept to me, when I think of the nonprofit, the service sector, is filling a role that in many parts of the world would be filled by government. And it's accepting that in our country, we do it differently. And these are charitable organizations and they deserve a special tax status. And under that premise, there needs to be, as indeed there is in their missions, a service mission. And when you couple that, it seems entirely at odds with contributing to the public health crisis surrounding income inequality, and therefore is appropriate to look at tax choices that we've made. But I appreciate the committee's time and contemplation, and I will continue to come back with more ideas as they surface, and I continue to look to take this on with any of you that to the extent we're unified on this as a real problem.
So, Sarah Swatkin, you've been silent.
Well, I would say I have an idea for income inequality, which is very important to me. I have a bill in my committee that raises the minimum wage that has, if we include you, Senator McDonald, 15 sponsors already.
Is it coming out?
Never know.
That increases the pie, doesn't it, Senator Sorokin? I think that we should definitely be moving that bill.
It takes a bite out of the pie that it allows people who do not get any pie to get some. Yep. So I'd be glad to sit and do this all afternoon. Faith, is this what do we have on what's next on the agenda?
Senator, do you want David Hall to walk through the bill?
Senator Pearson, would you like David Hall to walk through the bill?
I think we have another agenda item. So if people are interested in the details,
well,
I think
I'm chairing this, but I don't have the agenda before me, and I don't have a device that can do it at the same time. What's next on the agenda? And
Senator Cummings wants to return for the conversation at 3:45. I've received an email from her. She's somewhere nearby. And you can decide how you want to move forward.
So I think she's went to Barry to get her vaccine. Senator Brock, you would like to add something here? Or-
I just want to note that several of us have to leave for the chairs meeting at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
So in terms of just managing time.
Well, we could stand by until 4 o'clock and see if Senator Cummings has to go to the chairs meeting also.
Correct.
The thing on the
So-
agenda is talking about the governor's broadband proposals and CRF. That seems like a big conversation for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, what was did I sent out a something from the bridge. I think I sent it to all members of the committee before the day was over. If anybody didn't get it, did you summarize it for the members of the committee here, Senator Pearson? What was your quote?
It was about income inequality. It was rather timely. My quote, it was a great quote. I think we heard it if you were part of the last meeting. And it said, it was talking about how the thesis was that there's a wealth addiction in this country. And the quote says, if a monkey hoarded more bananas than it could eat, while most of the other monkeys starved, scientists would study that monkey to find out what the heck was wrong with it. When humans do it, we put them on the cover of Forbes. So I appreciated that, Senator McDonald. Thank you for sending it.
Okay, well, I guess we're gonna stand by until 4 o'clock
Right.
and see if Senator Cummings comes back hale and hearty and
Right.
has something for us. But yes, Senator Brock.
Since we did have something about broadband in the government proposal, if there's nothing else on the agenda, I could talk at least for a couple of minutes about the broadband bill that Maria has been drafting for me. I sent a copy of the first draft to Senator Cummings, but haven't distributed it yet to the entire committee since there are a number of pieces of it that are still being drafted and changed, and I hope it'll be done to be able to.
Why don't you give us something to think
tomorrow.
about of what might be in it, so the next
Yes.
time we meet, we've had
Do
some
that if you
reflection.
want to take a couple of minutes to do that, if the committee wants to at this point.
Go ahead.
In the bill, it reconstitutes the Vermont Telecommunications Authority, but in a way that is considerably different than the way the authority was set up previously. It creates an authority that is very much an activist group with a leader who is both a chair and effectively a CEO. And it includes a board that is dispersed between those appointed by the governor, those appointed in one case by the Committee on Committees, another by the speaker, and it's to be determined whether they are or not can be members of the bodies. It includes 2 people appointed by the governor who have expertise in telecommunications and the related fields. It includes the commissioner of public service, and it includes the treasurer. This organization is designed to have a leader who actually is somewhat like, call it the chair of the Public Service Board, the chair of the Green Mountain Care Board. In other words, someone who is actively employed and is actively involved in doing the work of the organization. And the organization is viewed essentially as the arm of, broadband czar is not the correct term, but rather than having a board that basically has as its mission to meet for the purpose of declaring the details of the agenda for the next meeting. It's a board that actually does something, and it has a number of things that it's charged with doing. It is designed to break up what may be almost a conflict between what the regulatory function is of the department and the advocacy function that needs to be done in order to assist both the CUDs and others in expanding broadband. it will include things like restating again for these purposes and for the board's purposes, the objective of the VTA in actually implementing the ideals, the called provisions, the responsibilities for broadband expansion that we already have contained in statutes, such as 100 and not using obsolete technology and so on. I wanted to put in there, but Maria cautioned me against it, a provision that in the event that the telecom plan was not done on time, that the chair of the board would be summarily removed from office and prohibited from holding any other public office. But I refrained from doing that.
Taking his firstborn children also?
Well, I was going further than that, but
Okay.
Is there a provision in there about how much the person can make?
I'm going to have to consult with Senator Pearson on that. Okay. The issue of funding and financing, I did not include a provision for bonding authority, which the previous VTA had, but I did include that as being the source of the management of what for anything else would be called the Vermont Telecommunications Fund, which would be a source of money, desirably heavily funded initially through some of the money that we get from COVID and other federal funds, but using that more as a source of reserve funding guarantee for loans through the VTA and private providers, and also as a funder of subordinated debt or debt that is used to loan to CUDs and others in order to do broadband expansion, almost as an equity funder. And there, the idea is to be able to leverage these funds and make them revolving so that we use one-time money that doesn't necessarily go away. One of the major problems, for example, that the CUDs have is that, or anybody starting up broadband like when EC Fiber did, is you have a picture in which they're not making any revenue for the first several years and the first several customers and miles of coverage. But at some point, it becomes economically viable so that this is a business that produces a profit. And the idea of this subordinated debt is to provide encouragement for others, both in the private sector and also in giving more comfort to VITA, that there is a partnership arrangement. And so conceptually, you could have this body, the Telecommunications Authority, providing, say, 25% of the funding for a project, VITA providing 25% of the project, and then looking to the outside market to provide 50%. The outside market is not encouraged to do so unless there is some money in there by someone else that also perhaps is providing a fund for reserve, so that there is less of a guarantee that these initial risky ventures are going to go bust, but at the same time providing a way that as you go down the line, that the CUD or other entity can pay that money back and pay that money back to its lender, which in this case partially would be the Vermont Telecommunications Authority, and the lender could then use that money again, leveraging it for other funding for other projects. The bill includes things like putting in a prohibition from giving government money to providers that don't meet broadband requirements, so that we're not giving money to people who are putting in DSL or putting in facilities that are unlikely to survive in the long term. In other words, to be soon obsolete. Again, following what we have in terms of our objectives in the standard. There's some provisions regarding the transition from the existing arrangements that we have, and also some movement of staff and funding from the PSD. People like Rob Fish, for example, that would move over to the Telecommunications Authority. I think those are broad brush, most of the things. And we've been working with Tim Briglin over in the House in terms of what they're doing. Their bill is going to roll out. It has a number of differences to what I put together, but I hope to distribute at least a pass of a look at what this is tomorrow, so that there's time for the committee think about it. And I guess there are a couple of options. Either we get a bill out ourselves, or if this isn't ready for prime time, in your opinion, we at least have a lot to talk about when the House bill, which looks like it's going to go, will come over. My ideal though would be to get both bills out on the table, just in case the House bill in some way falters. We still have a vehicle to use and to talk about, even if it's stripped down in nature.
Senator Brock, so we just got a couple minutes left, and
yep.
the challenge to how to use federal money wisely at the same time that you are putting together a bill that is expected to meet the guidelines that we've set forth in statute. Who steps in front of or relieves the current commissioner of her role, which currently is authorizing things that don't meet our statutory thresholds? When does
the Vermont
that take place?
Telecommunications Authority fills that role in lieu of the commissioner.
But would that take place on the passage of the bill, or when the committee
the bill is
meets, or will it be understood that she will, in her role, no longer authorize spending that doesn't meet that until the next step is taken?
Yeah, there's some transition provisions that Maria is still in the process of drafting, but that's what the intent is to provide a smooth transition from the PSD commissioner's role to that of the chair of the PSD and of the VTA, and of the board taking that responsibility for approvals of grants and financing and so on. It also removes the Telecommunications and Advisory Board, which has been, frankly, pretty ineffective in terms of its use by the PSD in reviewing and approving projects, and gives that responsibility to the board. I know there'll be obviously some transition because people have to be appointed and made effective, and it includes some provisions where the PSD will continue in its role until the VTA is actually, the members are appointed. And I think we put it in that the board members and the chair have to be appointed within 60 days after passage, and that the board has to hold its initial meeting at that point. The current situation will be in effect until that happens.
Ooh. Does anybody, we're out of time now, and be thinking about whatever aspect we have questions about the next time we get together. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to have Senator Brock considered being able to answer the next time we take this up? Senator Hardy.
Senator Brock, this is a longer conversation, but just to put this on your thinking, I'm wondering if how this would avoid duplication of duties, and whether or not this is just creating another infrastructure or sort of bureaucracy.
Well, what we're cleanly trying to do is take the things out of the PSD and put them in the VTA.
Okay. Well, I'll look at the language, and I want, that's definitely something I'm
a worthy question. Okay.
Yeah, but that's the whole goal. So the last thing we need is two people doing the same job, because I grant that will add to confusion, will add to cost and so on. And that's not the objective here at all.
Okay, good.
And I'm certainly sensitive to that.
So
yeah,
Senator
I would hope so.
Senator Bray, last question before we
close. Just an observation on it. Whatever entities created, I hope that they have sort of total skin in the game, so that they live or die on succeeding in this. Because I think part of our troubles have been that we've attempted to do things, but people have been, to some degree, maybe too comfortable with whatever lack of progress we've made. And I hope we don't comfort ourselves once more and create something that can comfortably not get the results we're aiming for. But
I would hope that we could come back, let's say 2 years from now and 4 years from now, and look at what we've done and not complain that we still don't have statewide broadband or a plan to get there.
Okay. Well, and we'd also like to we would like to be able to spend the money wisely that we think we may get. Yep. So in a timely fashion. Thank you all.
Time to check out.
Those are going to chairs meetings. Bye-bye. And
Ending live stream now.